great content gets ignored every single day. Not because it lacks quality, not because audiences have short attention spans, and not because the algorithm is secretly working against you. The uncomfortable reality behind why great content still gets ignored is far more psychological and far more fixable than most creators realize. If you've ever stared at low engagement numbers late at night, wondering how something you worked so hard on could receive so little response, you're not alone. That quiet frustration, that creeping doubt, that feeling that your effort isn't translating into momentum, is one of the most common experiences in modern content creation. Download the guide to the 4-scroll breaking system that will help you capture attention, trigger curiosity, and transform how your content performs. Because once you understand what's really happening, everything changes. There's a pattern that plays out repeatedly for creators, entrepreneurs, and professionals alike. You invest time into your ideas, you carefully craft your message, you focus on delivering value, you publish consistently. Yet despite doing what feels like all the right things, your posts fail to gain traction. Meanwhile, content that appears simpler, sometimes even less polished, attracts massive attention. This contrast often leads to confusion, discouragement, and eventually the dangerous belief that success in content is random. It isn't. There's a specific reason great content frequently underperforms, and once you see it clearly, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Even more surprising, the very thing most creators pride themselves on may actually be contributing to the problem. And perhaps most importantly, there's a structural shift that dramatically improves engagement without requiring more effort or more creativity. To understand why great content still gets ignored, we need to start with a fundamental misconception. Most creators assume people evaluate content based on quality. In reality, people initially evaluate content based on interest. That distinction may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Quality is a logical judgment. Interest is an emotional reaction. And emotional reactions happen first. When someone scrolls through social media, they are not actively analyzing information. They are scanning, filtering, reacting. The brain is operating in rapid decision mode, constantly determining what deserves attention and what can be ignored. This process unfolds in fractions of a second, long before your carefully constructed value can even be processed. Here's what's critical to understand. Your audience does not experience your effort. They experience your first impression. The human brain is designed to conserve energy. It filters aggressively, ignoring anything that feels predictable, familiar, or cognitively demanding. Within milliseconds, subconscious mechanisms assess incoming stimuli using silent internal criteria. Is this new? Is this relevant? Is this emotionally stimulating? If your content fails to activate one of these responses immediately, it disappears into the scroll, regardless of how valuable it may be. This leads to the first major insight behind why great content still gets ignored. Information does not capture attention. Perception does. Creators often pour their energy into improving the depth, accuracy, or usefulness of their content. While these qualities matter, they operate downstream from attention. Without attention, value remains invisible. No engagement can occur because no processing ever begins. This explains one of the most frustrating paradoxes in content creation. Highly educational posts often perform worse than expected, not because audiences dislike learning, but because learning requires cognitive investment. The brain resists effort unless curiosity or emotional tension justifies it. In other words, your content must earn attention before it can deliver value. Another overlooked factor is familiarity. Familiarity feels safe, but in the attention economy, familiarity is deadly. When content looks like everything else someone has already seen, the brain categorizes it instantly. Nothing new here. Keep moving. Even excellent content becomes invisible when it feels expected. This is why surprising statements, unexpected framing, and curiosity-driven openings outperform purely informative ones. Attention is not triggered by correctness. It is triggered by contrast, novelty, and cognitive disruption. Now consider the emotional dimension. Most creators underestimate how deeply attention is tied to emotion. Humans are wired to notice what feels urgent, intriguing, threatening, rewarding, or socially relevant. Content that fails to engage emotional processing struggles to compete, even if its informational value is high. This leads to another critical insight. Attention is captured emotionally first and justified logically later. If your content relies entirely on logic, explanation, or rational appeal, it risks being filtered out before engagement ever begins. There's also a structural issue many creators unknowingly face. They optimize for clarity but sacrifice tension. While clarity is important, attention thrives on unresolved curiosity. When content feels fully explained at first glance, the brain loses incentive to continue processing. Curiosity drives engagement. Resolution sustains it. Without curiosity, even great content struggles. At this point, a deeper question emerges. Why does some content feel impossible to ignore, while other content fades into the background? The answer lies not in creativity alone, but in psychological design. Scroll-stopping content is engineered, not improvised. It leverages cognitive triggers, pattern interruption, emotional activation, and perceptual contrast. It understands that attention is a neurological event before it is a rational choice. It respects the reality that your content competes not only against other creators, but against the brain's natural filtering mechanisms. This is where the biggest shift occurs. Stop asking, how do I create better content? Start asking, how do I create impossible to ignore content? Because better content without attention remains unseen. Attention-optimized content transforms performance even when the underlying information remains unchanged. Why great content still gets ignored is ultimately a systems problem, not a talent problem. When creators understand attention mechanics, engagement patterns become predictable rather than mysterious. Growth becomes strategic rather than accidental. This is precisely why the four-scroll breaking system exists. It provides a framework for designing content that captures attention intentionally, triggers curiosity consistently, and improves engagement structurally rather than relying on guesswork. Download the guide to the four-scroll breaking system that will help you stop being ignored, increase engagement, and transform how your content performs. Because great content deserves attention, and once you understand the psychology behind visibility, your results can change dramatically. The problem was never your effort. It was never your intelligence. It was never your value. It was always attention. And attention is learnable.